The PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Hello everyone and welcome to the PRovoke Media podcast. I'm Maja Pawinska Sims and I'm the EMEA editor of PRovoke. I'm here in London today and in more far-flung places with some amazing women to have a conversation to mark International Women's Day. I'm going to hand over briefly to Sue Hardwick, who's co-founder of Global Women in PR, who's going to talk a bit more about what we're doing today.
Thanks, Maja. This is a truly international gathering, and it's great to be doing this podcast with you, focusing on Beat the Bias, which is the theme for International Women's Day 2022. And I think, as all of us know, we are an industry very heavily populated by women. Some 2/3 in the PR and comms industry are women. However, when it comes to the boardroom, the balance between men and women is sadly a very different story. As our Global Women in PR 2021 index showed, that only 66% of the seats at the table were occupied by men, up from 64% in 2020. So it's an interesting conversation to be having about bias, how we can change the landscape and what we need to put in place to try and switch things around. And we've got three very experienced women who are, I'm sure, going to contribute towards moving the dial. And that's Alice Weightman, Valerie Boas and Laura Whitcomb, who's joined us. So I will hand back to you, Maja. Global Women in PR aims to champion, connect and support the women in our industry. And clearly bias is one of those areas that we are very keen to address. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say on this very interesting topic.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sue. So yes, let me just give a little bit more of a detailed introduction to my three guests today. First, we've got Alice, founder and CEO of Hanson Search and online talent marketplace The Work Crowd. Alice set up Hanson Search in 2002 and has a solid reputation as one of the leading search professionals for senior comms appointments in the global industry. Alice is well known for seeing gender diversity as a business imperative, and she's really proactive about encouraging economic and social diversity with the industry as well. So Alice, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next up, we've got Valerie, a freelance writer, speaker and facilitator based in Paris. Or I think she's in Spain at the moment. Valerie has two areas of expertise, diversity, inclusion and finance. And of course, biases play a huge role in both. Valerie's previously been a banker and an HR and communications executive, so she's well placed for this discussion. Valerie, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
And finally, we have Laura Whitcomb, who's Global Campaign Manager for the 30% Club, which is a global initiative led by business leaders taking action to increase gender diversity at board and senior management levels to a minimum of 30%, which is the point at which minority voices achieve critical mass and can be heard. Laura, hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm also a journalist by background, so I hope I can provide some insight into the industry that way too.
Fantastic. Welcome to all three of you and Susan, of course. So let's kick things off. The theme, as Sue said, of this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias. So what does that mean to you in the context of recruitment and retention of women into the PR and comms industry? And Alice, I'll come to you first with that one.
Great, thank you. I mean, breaking the bias, I see, is absolutely fundamental. For someone who's been now recruiting in this industry for over 20 years, there's been leaps and bounds that has happened about, trying to get women to the top. Increasingly, well, in fact, every brief that we receive at senior end, clients are saying, we want to hire more women. So when I hear stats that Sue was talking about, where 2/3 of the industry are women, but only roughly 1/3 are making it to the top, clearly there's something going wrong, and bias is a part of that. Mm-hmm. So tackling this issue in the recruitment side and retention is fundamental for us. you know, we see ourselves playing a really important role in creating a fairer workplace, an equal workplace, but not just about equality, it's about equity. It's about being just, impartial and fair. And that's what bias is all about, and making sure throughout every process that we can tackle these issues. So it's great to be discussing it. I'm really pleased it's been highlighted for Women International Day, and looking forward to this discussion. Thanks so much, Alice. Laura, what about you? What does breaking the bias mean to you?
Well, what I would say is that, you know, across the 30% Club's offering is that we are a global campaign trying to get women into the most senior positions in the world's biggest countries. You know, we started in the UK in 2010. Back then, there were only 12% women on the boards of the 100 biggest companies in the UK. Today, that figure's now almost 40%. You know, we're on our way to parity, which shows that progress is achievable and it can happen quite quickly. You know, it was only in 2019 that there were 30% women. So, you know, from 2019 to today, we've come up by 10%. That means parity is achievable now in the next few years. But while there's cause for optimism, you know, there's cause for huge frustration too. If we look at those FTSE 100 companies, there are only 8 female CEOs. If we look at the 500 biggest companies in the US, there are only 6% female CEOs there. Similarly in Australia. And I think it's important that we think, well, if we look at the graduate level in those very rich countries, women often account for just slightly above 50% of graduates. So at the entry level, we know that women and men go in at the same level. But when we look at the other end of the pipeline, there's this huge bottleneck. So bias clearly exists, and it's the work of the 30% Club to work with CEOs and chairs of the world's biggest companies to try and break that bias and improve their corporate culture so that all talent can flourish. So that's what breaking the bias means to me and to the 30% Club this year.
Sounds like there's still plenty of work to do. Valerie, what does break the bias mean to you when it comes to women working in the comms industry?
I think, well, first of all, I want to say that I completely subscribe to what Alice and Laura just said. I mean, there's it's really a matter for concern that in spite of huge efforts that have been made over the course of the last 10 years or so, in spite of the amount of constraints that is placed on both governments and companies, in spite of all this, it's very concerning that the figures that we mentioned are still exist. It's really a cause for concern that only 8% of FTSE 100 companies have a female CEO. I think in France it's about 3, to the same proportion, 3 out of 40 major companies have a female CEO, and most of the time they are not chairpersons and executive officers. The function is split. So there is clearly inequality and imbalance, inequity, whatever you want to call it. When I think about your question, Maja, we've talked about the macro thing, but I think it's really important to bear in mind the micro aspect of the problem. Because if there are in this industry 66%, if this industry is 66% female, and yet only 33% of the executive of the board of the C-suite of C-suits are female, then it means that even us women, contribute to this stereotype, contribute to the bias. So for me, breaking the bias means first and foremost, start with ourselves, start with understanding how biased we are, because we are all biased. There's no question about that. We are bombarded by stereotypes since our childhoods. We are the minute we start working, we understand that there are certain codes, that there are certain ways of working that effectively exclude women. So I think it's super important to first understand that we are biased, approach the issue, let's say, humbly, reading about bias, but also very practically, taking tests.
So, bias, unconscious bias is something obviously that we've started mentioning, but also proximity bias. So, for us, what I see is, businesses are wanting to make change, leaders are wanting to make change, but that needs to sort of infiltrate down. And there's certain sectors, I think, that probably are more open to women than others. So, if we look at across the communications industry, you're more likely to find more senior individuals in areas such as consumer than you are, say, in areas of corporate and public affairs. And that inevitably, you don't have as much role modeling, you haven't got as much sort of diversity of thinking there. And I think then there's unconscious bias can creep in. So, it's anything actually from even sort of thinking about, well, do female leaders take on the lion's share of bringing up their children? Will they therefore, is this going to impact them at work? Will they be looking for greater flexibility? So it's trying to sort of really understand if you want to get the best out of individuals, if you want to attract senior leaders who are female into your working environment and retaining them, it's about creating the right environments. It's about understanding the processes within a business and making sure that's filtered out across. It's not just about leadership, it's fundamental leadership. Get that right. But that then needs to filter all the way down the businesses. So those people that are conducting interviews, many of us, when we do interviews, have never been trained. And then suddenly we're asked to hire people into the team without any training at all. So there's areas that, companies can look at to make sure that they're getting rid of this throughout the process. And there's simple techniques to sort of, when people are hiring, a client actually introduced this to me a number of years ago, and we use it across all our hiring and retain projects, deciding what exactly are you looking for when looking to hire? What are the key skill sets you're looking for? What are the key personality traits? Developing a score metrics based on that and scoring people against that. And what it ensures is when you are hiring, you're keeping to what exactly you need for in that role, rather than seeing someone and thinking, oh, we've got really similar background and naturally being drawn to them. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, without even knowing it, you're hiring them based on how similar they are to you, rather than actually, can they do the job? Are they going to actually add value, add additional skill sets and thinking and add to your culture rather than mimicking it? And I think that's really important. So there are simple things that businesses can do to ensure that that unconscious bias doesn't infiltrate into the interview process, but then also making sure that once you attract these people and have them in your business, that you're retaining them. And I think the retention piece is absolutely fundamental. We did a survey recently, and it came out that about 20% of individuals were thinking about freelancing at a senior level, of which the majority were actually female. Mm. I wonder if that's because businesses therefore aren't working hard enough at retaining top female talent, and as a result are losing them. So it's the unconscious bias during the interview process, but then it's actually on the retention side.
And what's proximity bias? How does that differ from unconscious bias?
So it's the hiring people sort of who are similar, who who have a familiarity, who are close within your proximity. So the two are quite sort of closely aligned, and it's those biases that we need to be mindful of.
Laura, from your point of view at the 30% Club, what kinds of bias are you seeing, and how does that kind of play out at board level?
Well, I think proximity bias, like Alice just mentioned, is, real and significant. And I think that, and it's present across every industry. From my own journalism, I worked in the industry for 15 years, and most of the time I was working with people that look like me. I'm a white woman. I can count on one hand the number of colleagues who weren't white in that entire 15-year period. Journalism is notorious for being something of an old boys club. I'm not sure if it's still old boys. I think it's old boys and girls who have a tendency to recruit from their own networks. Oh, I need this piece written quickly. Do you know somebody that can help? Oh, I need somebody in for a couple of days a week, or I've got this job about to open up. Who can I go to? And I think that is a cultural issue that pervades across many of the creative industries specifically. And definitely identify with what Alice said about freelancing. In newsrooms, it's really obvious that there aren't very many women in their late 30s and early 40s in managerial positions, because so many have to go freelance or feel they have to go freelance. It's not a very well paid profession. So I just wanted to say what my personal experience has been, and how that informs my decision making and thinking. From the 30% Club's perspective, we see that play out across the board, and we know that it's at the first management rung where the gulf opens up between men and women's attainment, whether that's in their career trajectory, or their pay, or anything else. The opportunities that offer to women become significantly less the higher up the pipeline that you go. So as a campaign, we work with, like I said, CEOs and chairs exclusively. They're the only people that can become members of the 30% Club, to try and identify the obstacles throughout the pipeline that lead to that huge bottleneck at the very top of it, that leads to a lack of female leaders. And we do that not because it's good for women or that we're somehow a women's club, because we're not. I think that's a common mistake that's made about the 30% Club. The 30% Club is a voluntary business-led initiative that says that diversity leads to better business outcomes. It'll make you more profitable if you have the best talent on your leadership teams, and that is a good thing for business, for society, for men, for women, for children, and so I think that's what we always come back to.
Valerie, what's your take on what you've just heard there from Alice and Laura? What kinds of bias are women facing? Is this particularly acute at senior level from your experience?
I think it's acute at all levels, really. But of course, it's the more you go. I mean, it's a systematic process. In fact, the reason why there are so few women at very senior levels is that there's been discrimination ahead of their accession to the senior level. It's textbook definition of systemic discrimination. No, I think again, it looks like we've discussed that before, but no, again, I completely agree with what Laura and I'm sorry, I can't remember your with what my co-speakers have said. It's really, I mean, the biases are really at the heart of the matter. What I want to say is, to me, an unconscious bias is really something that comes, that distorts your vision of reality, and that comes into the way that prevents you from making the right decisions. That it's really something that is going to weigh on your judgment, if you will. So we've talked about proximity bias. We've talked implicitly about the maternity bias, which is the tendency to see a woman as a either a woman, either a mother or wanting to be a mother, and that effectively prevents women from accessing certain positions at a certain age. I think also there's another bias which is huge and has a very, very high impact, probably an even more significant impact as you progress up the corporate ladder, and that's the likability bias. And that bias actually affects both men and women. The likability bias is simply the tendency that, again, we all have, unfortunately, but we have to be humble about it. It's the tendency to like people more if they fit the gender stereotype that we are used to. So if a man, for example, is very empathetic, if he's very shy, if he's close to his emotions, he won't be liked as much as a man who's very assertive, a man who's very likes to make decisions, who's appears to be very strong, very vocal. And the other way around. Women, if they are shy and demure, and if they fit the stereotype, if they look the part, if they play the part, then they will be more liked than women who are vocal, assertive, aggressive, who have leadership skills, etc., etc. Problem being that in order to enter the boardroom and to survive in the boardroom, you effectively have to display those kind of qualities. You have to appear very, very self-secure. You have to appear very, assertive. You have to have those qualities. So really, it's a whole mindset that needs to change, in order to recognize that those qualities, assertiveness, leadership, these qualities are not female or male. They are just qualities. They pertain to a certain style. So I think that's really something that is at the heart of the problem that we have. And to me, the whatever you want to call it, the cognitive bias, the unconscious bias. Again, there's a variety of biases, but I think the heart of the matter is that, as Laura and Alice have underlined, it's really those biases, they really come in the way of performance. They come in the way of innovation. I mean, it's proven that companies that have a more diverse workforce, particularly when it comes to senior levels, these companies, they will have a better potential to innovate. And in the end of the day, they will have a better level of performance.
I totally agree, Valerie, with what you're saying there. And just picking up on Laura and your comment, Valerie, I find it's really interesting looking at early stage businesses, and often what they do is, on the proximity side, is they sort of think, they haven't got a high budget to hire, so they think, who do I know who can do that job? And they basically fill their business initially with people that they know who are very similar to them. And what you end up doing is then having this top team of people who are very, very similar. And then that starts cascading down. Then they realize they have a problem, but it's actually quite hard to fix because there's not a room to put another senior person up in there, because already you've got this core team who are all sort of like each other. And I think, to really get it right at those early stages of planning your business or starting a business, really think about this from a diversity point of view. Like, what are we going to do from day one, not, year 5, because by that stage, the culture's too embedded and you've got to break all that down. So I think getting that right up front is absolutely fundamental.
That's fundamental, but also very difficult because, I completely subscribe to what you just said, Alice. It's I've seen so many companies that come to us, because I work for an organization called Gloria that does training for startup companies and all sorts of companies, really, to raise awareness about what's at stake with diversity and inclusion. And I've seen the case so many times that you go into this company and you only have typically engineers, all, having graduated from the same school, white male in their mid-30s. And when they hire a white male engineer from a different school, they believe they're doing diversity, So it's really hard to sort of reverse that tendency, that bias really that we all have. And yet it's critical.
So let's get practical, ladies. How do we get around all these structures, all these drivers, all these like quite deep level biases that we all clearly have, men and women, to ensure the communications industry and the creative industries are recruiting and retaining women at all levels, especially from diverse backgrounds? Have you seen any notably innovative approaches from companies? Alice, you outlined, kind of getting it right at the recruitment stage and trying to filter out the bias at that stage. But what else can we do? What are your practical tips?
Yeah, I mean, some companies have made some great progress in this. Ketchum's a really good example of a business that's really kind of looked at diversity and inclusion across the company. Has to come from the top, number one. There has to be a clear strategy. Diversity inclusion has to be a strategy, not just an initiative. Many businesses start with an audit, so actually auditing what are the processes, what are the systems, and then actually setting some targets in place. And I know everyone sort of feels, targets is that bit of a dirty word. Do we want that? We don't want tokenism. But actually, we have targets on so many other areas of the business. Why not have it on diversity? At Hanson Search, we have it. We have a target in terms of recruiting from a gender, but also Black, Asian, ethnic minority. So we set that and we monitor it to make sure that we are doing our piece in helping bring about change. So I do think targets are important, and then making sure that they are built into everyone's objectives. So it comes from the top, but then every single team has an objective around diversity and inclusion, whether that's to do with hiring of their team or the actual environment that they're creating. And, when businesses are doing this audit and looking at it, it's actually about the sort of structure, the procedure, but also the experience side. All those three things must be aligned. So for example, writing job briefs, are they written in a way which helps create diversity? Are they open to job shares, to part-time work? Could you make a job part-time or a shared job? Is the wording right? Are they aligned to values? So, making sure things like that, which actually I think are quite easy wins, but actually could have really good impact on that recruitment side and hiring side, but also making sure that you're going out to a diverse range of candidates possible. So thinking outside the norms. Don't just advertise where you think you might find people. Try and think a bit broader. Align yourselves to some organizations that also help promote that, such as the Black Comms Group, if you're looking at increasing from a more Black and Asian ethnic minority background. So there's different groups out there that can help facilitate this group. Try and push your adverts out and make sure you're sharing them to as broader group as possible to attract women in and people from different diverse backgrounds in.
Thanks, Alice. That's great. Laura, what are your thoughts on what practical things can be done? I mean, a lot of this sounds like where there's a will, there is a way. It's not that difficult if you focus on it, is it?
No, and I think I would also add that where there's a paycheck, there's a way. So I think it's really interesting to see that some really big companies are taking the initiative and linking executive pay to diversity. So, there's clear accountability and motivation to do better. So I think we'll see more of that from companies going forward. There's a lot of discussion about it, and so I think that model will change. And to reiterate Alice's point that diversity and inclusion has to be a fundamental business strategy. It's, you know, it's a lens through which you should look at every other aspect of your business. It shouldn't be just delegated to one particular team or looked at one particular time of year when, you know, some data reporting is required. So I think, you know, that's part of the issue and maybe a way forward. I think, you know, at the senior leadership levels, when appointments are being made and exec search firms are involved, you know, companies can say to the search firms, well, we're going to insist on diverse candidates being put forward. We don't want to see any all white male shortlists from now on. You know, we've heard of lots of examples of that becoming more and more the case. And I think also that, you know, there is a clear place for mentoring. And I think there's been a lot of talk about mentoring and whether that's just maybe fixing the women and not the problem, as though there aren't enough qualified women out there. I don't believe that for a moment. I think that there are a lot of women and companies that get enormous benefit out of mentoring. It can change thought processes. It can widen networks. It can improve confidence. I'm a big advocate of mentoring. I've been a mentee and a mentor, and have reaped enormous awards through it personally. The 30% Club runs the biggest cross-organisational mentoring programme in the world, and that's for women, but also people from any underrepresented characteristic. But to go beyond mentoring, and there's an awful lot of scope to do that, what we need is women and other minorities to be sponsored and to be champions throughout organisations. And that's different to mentoring. You know, that's actively creating opportunities. It's pushing for opportunities. And so the three go hand in hand: mentoring, sponsorship, and championing. I'm not sure if I've just coined a new word there. But I think all of these things would really help get beyond those biases.
Lots of good tips. Thank you, Laura. Valerie, earlier on you touched on we have to recognise that we are all biased and we all have our own biases, and sometimes that's women not doing women a favour without necessarily consciously meaning it. Do you have some tips on how we can uncover our own biases so they can be overcome, and really identifying those and trying to move past them?
It's really important to recognize that when an organization is promoting gender diversity, when it's senior management, top management is advocating the women in leadership and these sort of things, they're not doing women a favor. They really are doing the company a favor. So it's really important to recognize that. What's really also important to recognize is that when diversity is being promoted, by chance or by design, and I'll come back to that, it's very rare that companies move back. Once the move has started, it's so obvious that the amount of benefits that companies are going to derive from it is so huge that there is no way back. That a company that has engaged in diversity will not move back. And that's why, in terms of practical tips, I think the idea of having quotas, for instance, of having a certain number of seats or positions reserved for women or preferred for women, even though it might seem a little autocratic or old-fashioned or however you want to call it, I think it has some benefits. If you look at the situation of a country like France, for instance, 10 years ago, in 2011, a law was passed that made it compulsory for listed companies to have at least 40% of women on the board of directors. And 10 years down the road, what happens is that you don't have 40% of women on the board. You have nearly 50%. France is actually number 2 in the world after Iceland. And why is that? Well, that's because companies have recognized that there's a huge benefit of having more diversity in the boards. You make better decisions, you make better products, your strategy is better, etc., etc. You retain talents more, etc., etc. The list is almost endless. So having not necessarily quotas, but having a very affirmative tone and way of expressing the fact that you want to, as a company, you want to promote diversity is of utmost importance. How that can be achieved on a more practical way is, for instance, by insisting that for any senior recruitment in the short list, there be parity. There be at least as many women as men. That's an easy way that you can even senior managers can go about promoting diversity. Just insisting that any shortlist should be at parity, should have as many women as men. That's an example, but there's countless examples. I think also I'm a big believer in in rationality. I think if people, most people don't want to be sexist, just as most people don't want to be racist. They just don't realize that they've been conditioned, that they've been bombarded with stereotypes, and that their vision of the world is embedded in those stereotypes. So I'm a big believer in the benefits of awareness-raising campaigns. I think, training people, explaining to people, making people aware of their biases, talking about easy things like tests. There are tests that anyone can take that are really freely available online to become aware of your own biases, discussing the particular biases that are going to apply in your industry or in your company because of history and a number of things. I think this works pretty well also, raising awareness and talking about it, making sure that it's not the issue that you don't talk about, that it's there under the carpet somewhere and that you don't want to address. And lastly, I think a practical thing, a practical tip that companies can use and that every manager actually can use is to promote role models. We've talked about the importance of role modeling. I personally believe that it's extremely important to have women, but also people of color, people with disabilities, to recognize that they are contributing to the business, and to make sure that these people are heard, that these people are seen, that their performance is recognized, that they are praised, that they are quoted, that they really appear, that they are trusted also. That is of paramount importance.
Great tips there, Valerie. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a really long list. I've just got a massive long list of bullet points now.
I could go on and on and on. There's so much more.
Do you mind if I quickly jump in and add one really important
please
thing?
Please do, Alice.
I think we've forgotten is also the onus on women, because if there is a promotion, if there's opportunities up for promotion, there's opportunities for jobs. Women, unfortunately, feel they've got to tick every single box before they apply, and and sometimes don't put themselves forward. And so as much as businesses need to support women, women need to support themselves and say, do you know what? I'm going to go for that job. I can't tick all the boxes, but if I don't put my hand up, I'll never get it. And I think we as individuals need to put our hands up more and go for it, because there is a sentiment now of wanting to encourage women to the top. And I think if actually more women put their hand up, they're more likely to get there and have the confidence and conviction and believe in themselves, because they're hugely talented. They're often hugely efficient at getting stuff done because they're so used to juggling lots of things with home and work life. And actually, those qualities are really appreciated within businesses. Everyone now is just saying, they want people who are digital and hardworking, who they can trust and get the job done. And I think women underestimate that. And so for as much as we talk about what businesses need to do from a structural point of view, I think it's important women also do it for themselves and for each other, so they make sure that they have the role models and that they are role modeling to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we should absolutely be putting ourselves forward more, being less humble, and, just having that confidence to put ourselves forward for things where maybe you don't tick everything on the box, but damn well you can do it. Ladies, just quickly, one last question for you. What are your hopes for how parity, equality, balance are going to play out for women in the communications industry over the next couple of years? What do you hope will really change and change quickest?
I mean, from my perspective, and what I'm seeing is, I think now that we're sort of coming out of the pandemic, and some of the biggest, obviously, I think positive things that came from it was the flexibility. Before, women had to sort of fight for flexible working. It was a bit of at the end of the recruitment process. Now, could I work one day a week from home, or, can I drop the kids off in the morning? It's an unwritten rule now that that's a possibility. And if it's not, go to another company and find it, because there is flexibility out there. And I think this could be, a new age for women, where businesses are creating new business models, and it's an opportunity for women to say what's going to work for them. There's also a huge lack of great talent. So actually the power has shifted from the employer to the employee. And if you're good at your job, you're skilled, it's your opportunity to say, this is what best works for me. I'll make sure the job is done, and I'll make sure it's good for the business. But actually, it's your opportunity to actually put your hand up and dictate more of the terms. So again, if you're not in a business that works in that way, there are plenty of businesses out there offering fantastic opportunities to do that. And so companies are waking up and saying, we have to offer greater flexibility. The survey that we did, flexibility ranked higher than reward and recognition. So it is number two in the list of things. Culture and people come first, then flexibility, and then money. So I think this could be a new age of turning, where we hopefully can retain that talent that we're losing, because clearly there is some form of loss there if 2/3 of the industry are women and only 1/3 are at the top. And hopefully now we can set a new, brighter future and change those stats.
I do sincerely hope you're right. I think I love the idea that the pandemic has kind of ushered in a kind of a new age of flexibility, combined with the talent crunch, combined with everybody thinking more about what they really want out of their work and their life, and having the confidence to go for it. Hopefully those are all combined into kind of a good amount of progress being made over the next couple of years, because it's been slow, let's face it. Laura, what are your hopes for how we'll see bias and balance for women play out over the next couple of years?
So I think it's something that I alluded to a little bit earlier. When progress is made, it can be made quickly. To go from that tipping point of 30% women on boards in 2019 in the UK across the FTSE 100 to be within touching distance of 40% now, just over 2 years later, and probably 2 or 3 years away from parity. if not a little bit longer. You know, that does give me hope that real change is possible. And I do think that the pandemic has completely changed the world of work forever. That's not to say I'm not a realist, because, you know, flexible working, as much as it comes with many advantages, there are significant disadvantages, and we know they affect women. So lots of companies, lots of industries still, you know, put a value on presenteeism. And if women are working more remotely than men more often, then that means they're more likely to be overlooked, statistically speaking, doesn't it? And we know that it's women who exited the workplace more than men since the pandemic, voluntarily or involuntarily. You know, I don't think I'll ever forget that statistic that came out of the US Labour Office, that said that all of the job losses, I think in January 2021, were held by women. You know, that's really frightening. And, you know, women are not only caring for children, but they're most likely to be caring for any other member of the family that gets ill. There's a whole generation of women, you know, that they've been referred to as the sandwich generation, where they're simultaneously caring for their children and their parents. And while men continue to be the breadwinners, then women are going to be in this position more and more. So I'm optimistic that the changes in flexible working will really help this industry. You know, as a journalist, somebody that's been in the you know, the sphere of work, I know how much easier my life has been by working flexibly than being, you know, bound to a newsroom. Some jobs I've been in at 7:30 a.m, left at 6, raced home to pick up a child, then got back on my laptop. And, you know, the news cycle is 24 hours. A story is as likely to break on Christmas Day as it is at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. So I think that there's definitely reasons to be optimistic, but we can't kid ourselves that flexible working, you know, is a silver bullet that's going to change things. And while I'm, you know, really pleased that there has been this tremendous success in the UK of getting towards parity at the board level, it's very sobering to come back to that statistic of 8 female CEOs out of 100 in our biggest companies, and that plays out across the world.
We must keep these stats in mind while we're celebrating and making moves in the right direction. Valerie, I'll finish with you. Just briefly, what are your hopes for how things are going to evolve for women in the workplace in the short term?
I have many hopes, and I'm very hopeful. I'm convinced that I'm an optimist, and I'm convinced that things are moving in the right direction. My hope is that we go past. I mean, we all progress. We all become aware of the huge benefits of diversity. My hope is that more women are sitting not only on boards but also on all sorts of committees. My hope is that even, you know, incompetent women are promoted. Incompetent women are, you know, there are errors in certain castings that people fail. That you know, because that happens for men. You know, sometimes incompetent men are being promoted. Sometimes incompetent men are being hired. So I hope that happens in the short run. And in the longer run, my hope is that diversity, which is being brought about by women, for women, etc., also benefits all the other underrepresented groups, because we need all the skills that we can use. We need the skills of, you know, younger people. We need the skills of older people. We need the skills of people from all kind of ethnicities. You know, we need all these skills. We need the skills of people with different abilities. So my hope really in the end of the day, and that's more long-term than short-term.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Valerie. That's a fascinating discussion for International Women's Day, all about breaking the bias. So many practical tips in there, so much optimism and realism, of course, from all of you. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.